Hello, welcome back to economics. This week we're going to be getting into labor markets. So we'll be talking about everything related to productivity and income, poverty and inequality. We'll get into some things about minimum wages, efficiency wages, discrimination, everything related to labor economics. And if you like this chapter, I love this chapter, one of my favorite topics. There's a whole lot more you can do. You can take an entire class just on labor economics. But if you wanted to get into any of this stuff more with me, pop in my office hours, send me a Canvas message. We do not get enough time to talk about this. So we're going to be looking at what is a labor market. We'll be talking about how do we calculate productivity, marginal product of labor, marginal revenue product of labor, uh, and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. So in economics, labor is an input to production, so it's part of an input market. So if you guys remember way back to the beginning of the semester when we had our whole circular flow model, we had product markets at the top, and we had factor markets or input markets at the bottom, and we have households on one side, and we've got firms on the other side. And remember, the idea is that money flows one direction and resources flow the other. So households are going to pay money to the firms to buy the products, and then the firm in turn is going to give the stuff to the households. But then firms have to then pay the households for the inputs. Okay, and so in this case, we're talking about labor. So they have to pay them for their labor, and then households supply the actual work being done. So we get the circular flow. Money is moving in one direction, stuff is moving in the other direction. And so this is going to be down here. So what that means is that employers are going to be on the demand side. They're going to be the buyers down here, this bottom half of our circle. And households are going to be the supply or the sellers of their own labor. So we're still going to get all that same stuff with our supply and demand model. We're still going to get equilibrium price and quantity. It's still going to work the same way. It's just we're flipping who is who. Okay, so employers are the buyers or demanders. Workers are going to be the sellers or suppliers of labor. And in our market, we'll have supply and demand. It's going to look the same. For price, we're going to have wages. And down here for quantity, we're going to have like the number of jobs / number of workers. So wages are going to be determined by the interaction of supply and demand, just like every other market. So you want to know, why are we getting paid a certain amount of dollars for this job? Well, look in the supply and demand and you'll see it turns into whatever pay. We're going to get into a lot of those differences today. And small differences in worker value can lead to really large changes in wages. Sometimes we'll have winner take all markets. So there's a winner and there's a loser. Whoever wins gets everything, whoever loses gets nothing. Or you could think of things like when there's like the Olympics, so gold medal versus silver medal winners or versus fourth place. They can have very similar quality, all four of these people. But whoever gets the gold medal gets the most. Silver is next. Fourth place often gets nothing. Even though the person who got fourth place in the competition today could have gotten first on a different day. Right? So we can have small differences in worker value that could lead to really large changes in wages or income. We're going to start with the supply of labor for now, and then we're going to focus a little bit more on the demand side. So for the supply of labor, you want to think there's only 24 hours in a day, and people have to think of what do they want to do with those hours. Do they want to work for 24 hours? Do they want to work for 8 hours or 10 hours or 6? But they're limited by time. So you can't work more than 24 hours in a day. It's just not possible. Leisure, which is free time, it's not working, is considered a normal good. And so what we see with the pattern of that is as people's income goes up, their demand for leisure also increases. Figuring out how many hours of work somebody should do, you're looking at that marginal utility they get from earning income compared to the marginal utility from leisure. And we're relating that to like the PY stands for price of income and W is divided by wages. A lot of times economists take this other side and turn it into $1. Don't really need to worry too much about that right now. Just understand that we're comparing that marginal utility of leisure divided by income or wages that we would be earning during that time. And so what we're going to see is sometimes it's worth it to work more hours and get that extra income, and sometimes it's going to be worth it to take the leisure and not take the income. And so we're comparing like how much extra happiness am I going to get from working, from earning that money, to how much extra happiness am I going to get from not working, from taking that leisure. And there are some things that can shift the supply curve of labor. So when we have changes in preferences for work and leisure, that can happen at various times throughout life. Sometimes when you're a college student, sometimes you need to say, I need to work because I have to. I don't make that much money. I need to keep working and working because I have to pay for school. Or maybe the opportunity cost of working or the opportunity cost of leisure is going to be lower in college because you're not earning as much per hour. And you may say, yep, I'm going to take this whole week off work and I'm going to go travel or I'm going to go do something else. Or depending on if you have kids or no kids, all these things sort of play into that. And so we're going to see how these things change throughout your life. Changes in income will shift the supply curve. Sometimes we're talking about household income. Sometimes it's different ways of focusing on income, but think about like household income, for instance. If your household income goes up, you may be willing to supply less labor. If your household income goes down, you may need to supply more labor. And so that household income really can have a big impact. Prices of related goods and services. So, one good example of this would be like childcare. So, if you are working, what are you going to do with your kids? Childcare is extremely expensive. And for some people, the cost of childcare is actually greater than the wages they're going to earn from working. So, what's going to happen in this case? Well, you either have to pay more money to send your kids to childcare than what you're earning, or sometimes people will say, I'm just going to not work. So, this often, especially when you have little kids, if you need them go to like infant daycare, it's well, it really just depends. I can't tell you the prices because it depends. But you're definitely looking at, $1,000 a month, maybe $2,000 a month, maybe more, depending which hours and where you're going. It's very expensive. And then preschool, so care for 2 and 3 year olds, can easily be $1,000 to $2,000 a month. Some places in Pasadena that I looked at recently were over $2,500 or more per month. And then who knows the time you're actually listening to this compared to when I recorded it. Maybe now it's gone up to like 50,000 a month. I don't know. Probably not. I usually re-record my lectures, more often. Uh, but it's expensive, right? So what do you do if you're after taxes? So your disposable income, you are earning $1,500 a month. And you have 2 kids who are going to need to be in childcare for a total of $2,000 a month. Are you going to work and basically lose $500 a month, or are you going to quit working, stay home with your kids until they get older? Well, honestly, it depends. So you're going to see people making both of those choices. Because one problem with staying home with the kids is that it does hurt your long term income growth. Because part of that wage formula, it includes number of years of experience, or sometimes it's called tenure, like how long you've been doing that same job. And so while you might be losing money this month or this year for the next couple of years, in 4 or 5 or 10 years, it might make a really big difference in your salary. You're going to be 3 or 4 or 5 years behind. And so sometimes people will choose to take this lower wage than what they're having to pay for childcare because they need that longer term experience. But oftentimes, if you have multiple working adults in the family, it might make sense to say, okay, well, we have expensive childcare. We're just going to have one person working, and one person who stays home with the kids. And then once the kids go back to, like, I don't know, first grade or kindergarten, someone can go work, and the child care costs are usually not as high. Think about population. So more population is going to shift that supply curve to the right. Less population will shift it to the left. And what people feel like is going to happen in the future, not just the economy, but what they think is going to happen in a particular job market, is going to cause that supply curve to shift. Especially because for a lot of jobs, it requires extensive education or training. So if I want to be a teacher, I'm not just thinking about what's happening in the teaching field right now. I'm trying to predict what's going to happen in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Or if you want to be a college professor and you decide to go get a PhD, you're thinking about what's the job market going to be like in 6 years or 8 years or 10 years when I graduate. And for the most part, supply curves are upward sloping. They follow that normal trend of an upward sloping supply curve. As the wage goes up, we're going to see more people willing to work, right? More hours, more people. It just depends. So sometimes when we're looking at the whole market, we're looking at number of individuals. So this supply curve, if you have a quantity of 10, that means 10 people. Sometimes supply curves could be number of hours of work, especially in fields where it's flexible and people have a choice if they work 35 or 40 or 70 hours. This graph right here is looking at an individual's labor supply. So just one person. And so it's not just like a choice of yes or no. I'm going to supply 0 labor or 1 labor. This is looking at how the number of hours is impacted per pay period. Sometimes it could be per week. And so this can take into account things like overtime pay, or lots of other factors. Now, this example is from your textbook. This is in the Libra textbook, chapter 12. And there's a much longer explanation of Mrs. Wilson. It looks at how her labor supply changed when there were changes in, I think it was the airline industry. And when her pay went up or down, it showed like how she changed the number of hours of work. So in this example, we see up to point A, she has a normal upward sloping supply curve. So as the wages go up, she's willing to work more hours. So it makes it worth her time. Once we get to from point A to B, it's getting a little bit steeper. So that means she's willing to supply less extra hours as the wage increases. From B to C, she's not willing to supply any extra hours. So it looks like 48 is going to be the maximum she's willing to work per week. And then from C to D, when wages get even higher, she actually wants to work less. So in this example, wages went from $20 an hour up to $25 an hour. And then she said, oh, if I'm getting paid $25 an hour, I actually only want to work 42 hours a week. I don't want to work 48. This is called a backward bending supply curve. And it's going to be different for every individual. It's really sort of hard to figure out exactly where that point is. But there is a point where wages are high enough that people don't want to work more hours. They actually might want to work less. Generally, for most people in the population, they're somewhere between over here at point nothing all the way up to point B or C. There's some kind of like maximum hours they're willing to work. Not a lot of people get to the C to D portion, this backward bending portion of the curve. At least not on a regular basis, but there are a lot of examples where you'll see it. So you could imagine, let's say you need, I don't know, let's say you need $10,000 a month to pay for your household. Okay, so if you need $10,000 a month, let's say typically there's going to be 2,080 hours in a work year. If you're working 40 hours a week, that's 2,080. Okay, so this would be times 12, so $120,000 a year. You're getting $57.69 per hour. Okay, so that's how much you're earning. You're able to pay for your family's stuff. Maybe you get a pay raise to $60 an hour. You're going to keep working the same amount of hours. But let's say all of a sudden your pay doubles You're getting paid $120 an hour. And you still are like, well, we just need $10,000 a month. You might not cut your hours in half. Okay, so, whoops, sorry. Okay, $120 an hour. Typically, people wouldn't cut their hours in half. They want to take advantage of the fact that now they're getting paid more money. Um, if they kept working the full 40 hours a week, then that's, $20,000 a month or $240,000 a year ish, approximately. Okay. But they're going to say, well, I'm now making twice as much as before. I'm well easily able to cover my costs and I have extra. I'm going to cut back a little. And so maybe they work, instead of 40 hours a week, they're going to work 30 hours a week. Okay, so 30 hours a week times 52 and then times $120 an hour. Now you're making $187,000, which is, let's say divided by 12, is about 15,600 per month. So you're going from having 10,000 a month to 15,000 a month. Pretty good increase, and you're lowering your hours from 40 to 30. So this is a scenario I think most people could understand. Maybe you don't have a choice though, and so we'll get into that. A lot of jobs are like, it's 40 hours a week, it's 35 hours a week, it's 50 hours a week. They give you in hours, and it's kind of like you have to say yes or no. And you often can't just be like, well, I got a raise, so I want to work 2 less hours a week. Sometimes you can go from part time to full time. Some jobs give you more flexibility. If you own your own company, you definitely have that flexibility. So a lot of times we actually can't get to this portion of our backward bending supply curve because of how labor contracts work, preventing people from reducing their hours. But if you had a choice to get, 50% more money and you're going to be working 25% less hours, most people would think that was great. So some of this is theoretical, some of this we have actual data for, and you can see it in certain types of jobs. And then in other aspects, we don't see it very often. When we look at the demand for labor side, this is from the perspective of the company, for the firm. So they can choose how they want to produce goods or services. And in addition to raw materials, they use capital and labor to produce goods and services. We talked about this a couple chapters ago, before we started into perfect competition. And so capital and labor are substitutes in production. Firms are going to use that combination that's the most efficient or often the cheapest. And so, how much labor they're going to demand really is determined by how much value that labor is producing compared to that cost of using labor. So, marginal revenue product of labor looks at how much extra stuff is produced per person per hour times the marginal revenue, or the extra money generated from the sale of whatever quantity that is. And then we multiply those together, and it tells us that marginal revenue product of labor. Sometimes this is just called the value of marginal product of labor, or VMP. In this case, we're looking at MRPL. So if I am producing something and I'm generating $10 per item of value, and I am producing 20 per hour, then I'm generating $200 of value per hour. Marginal product of labor and marginal revenue, it also subtracts the cost of raw materials, overhead costs, all that extra stuff. So we're just saying, what's that extra that's left to pay people? We'll get into some examples in just a minute. And then we're going to compare that to what's the cost of labor. So we would compare this to the wage. So if I have an employee that's generating $200 an hour and the wage is $50 an hour, then I'm definitely going to want to hire them, right? I'm going to be making profit. It's going to be well worth it. Or if I have capital, I have a machine that's generating $200 an hour, and the cost to operate the machine and own it maybe is $75 an hour. and I could pay a human 50, I'm going to pay the human 50, right? I'm not going to do the machine. If the machine gets cheaper, maybe the machine is $40 an hour, then I might shift over and pay the machine. Now, some of this is also dependent on if it's long run or short run. So if you remember from our production chapter, factors of production, capital is only adjustable in the long run. So I can get machines to replace people, but it's going to take a long time. Human labor, that can vary quickly in the short run. I can hire more people, I can pay more overtime, I can have people work more or less hours. And so we're going to focus on that in some of our next few examples. But what we should expect is that wages are not going to be higher than that extra value created during production. So if you are creating $30 of value per hour, that's the absolute most that you're going to be able to be paid. We're going to ignore the fact that there are employment taxes, there's benefits, there's actually a whole bunch of other things that are involved in this process. So you really do need to be creating more value than what your take home pay is. And we unfortunately don't have time to get into too much of that right now. So when we're looking at the value of labor, we're talking about marginal product of labor first, and that's going to be the additional output from one more worker or one more hour of work. So if I work an extra hour, how many extra things am I going to grade? Or how many extra classes can I teach? The marginal revenue product is additional revenue generated from one more worker or one more hour of work. And so we want to think about how many workers should be hired. There's diminishing marginal returns, so we can have a lot of people and they're not able to produce as much as the earlier people. We'll look at an example in a second. But the idea is that we want to hire more workers as long as that marginal revenue product is greater than or equal to their wage. Shifts in the demand are going to come from things like product demand, technology, productivity, number of firms. These are all things that are going to impact how valuable it is to have workers. So, for instance, if my product demand is increasing, let's say I sell hats, and the demand for hats goes up, I am now making more money, more profit per hat. When we look in the market for hat workers, um, now my demand for hat workers is also going up because I need more workers or more hours of work, which causes wages to go up as well. So we see that that product demand is very directly linked to how much people can get paid in each industry. Improvements in technology and productivity, people can make more stuff per hour per person. That's going to also lead to higher wages. More firms entering the market is going to increase demand. And so anytime we see demand going up, we're going to see wages going up as well. And anytime we see demand going down, we're going to see typically wages are going to go down as well. So let's look at some examples. So we have a sandwich shop owner who wants to know how many employees to hire. And after all non-labor costs are counted, there is $1.50 left over per sandwich. So after you pay for the meat and the bread and the electricity and the advertising and all that stuff, after every sandwich, there's $1.50 left. Okay, so we are going to look at the total number of employees, the total sandwiches per hour. We want to calculate that marginal product of labor, so how much extra quantity is being made. And then we want to look at that marginal revenue product. And so sometimes you're going to see this as just MRP, marginal revenue product, and sometimes you see this little L down here, which means marginal revenue product of labor. And that's just going to be this extra $1.50 multiplied by the quantity. So it's not the total value of the sandwich times the quantity, it's just that extra that's left over so we can see how much we're possibly going to pay our workers. Okay, so we're going to assume minimum wage is $7.50, and we want to know how many people are going to be hired. Okay, so let's say I just gave you the first two columns. We could actually calculate these other two columns. Okay, so total sandwiches per hour. If we have 0 employees, we're having no sandwiches. It means 0 marginal product of labor, 0 marginal revenue product. It's just going to be nothing. If we have 1 employee, they can make 10 sandwiches per hour by themselves. So their marginal product of labor is 10. And then that marginal revenue product is going to be 10. So the MPL times whatever dollar value. So in this case, it's going to be times $1.50. So that first worker is basically generating $15 of extra value per hour. Now, when we have 2 employees, we go from 10 total sandwiches to 15. And so the marginal product of labor for the second employee is 15. Why is it going up? Is it because the second employee, we found a better worker? We've now hired like a better guy to make sandwiches than the first guy? Not necessarily. It could be when you hire the first guy, he has to take the orders, he has to make the sandwiches, he has to he has to take the payments. And this is all going to be really inefficient. He's going to have to be changing his gloves a lot, doing all this stuff. Now, once we've added the second guy, they can split jobs, right? The first guy can take the order and make the sandwiches. The second guy can take the payment and package up the sandwiches, whatever he needs to do. And it actually makes both of them more productive. But we would say for the company, adding the second worker adds 15 more sandwiches per hour. And if we multiply that by $1.50, that means adding a second worker is going to generate $22.50 per hour. When we add the third worker, we go up to a total of 35, which means 10 extra sandwiches. When we have 4 workers, it's 40 total, which adds 5 extra. 5 workers, we get 42, which is 2 extra. And then 6 workers is still 42, which means 0 extra sandwiches. So you need to think about like how crowded it gets behind that sandwich counter. Okay, so here's our sandwich counter. So we've got one guy. That's fine. He can move around. Now we have the second guy. He works over here taking the payments. Third guy is helping out, in the middle, maybe helping. This guy does veggies and bread. This guy does meat. Add a fourth worker. It's starting to get crowded back there. Fifth worker, right? Sixth worker. They can't really move very much. And so you could see like adding more people is not super helpful. If they have a lot of customers, eventually they're going to expand the size of their restaurant. They need to increase that capital as well. And then they can handle that extra capacity, right? So, really, we're thinking about some of those physical limitations. You could think about like a coffee shop. If it had 200 people working behind the counter, like it's just not going to work. Okay. So, we see this diminishing marginal returns. We're getting less extra sandwiches per worker added just because of some of those limitations of space. So, at $7.50, the most workers we'd be willing to hire is going to be 4, because workers 1 through 4 are generating at least $7.50 of value per hour. That fifth worker is adding only $3, and that sixth worker is adding nothing. Okay, so we're not going to hire extra people if it's going to cost us money that we're not earning back. Okay, what happens if wages go up to $15 an hour? Well, now this fourth guy is not going to be hired anymore because he's not generating at least $15 in value per hour. At this point, we're going to stop after 3 workers. Oops, there you go. We're going to stop after 3 workers because only workers 1, 2, and 3 are generating at least $15 an hour. So increases in productivity can also make wages go up. In this case, they were still just as productive. Productivity didn't change. The only thing was that wages went up from 750 to 15. If workers become more productive and they can make more sandwiches per hour, then wages can go up as well. So let's say all of this stuff doubles. We get 20, 50, 70, 80, 84, and 84. Okay. Now, all of a sudden, we have way more, right? So 20, 30, 20, 10, 4, still 0. The last guy's still not helping. Well, if they're making $1.50 per sandwich, you can see this is going to go up to $30. It's going to go up to 45, 30, 15, 6, and then 0. So if they're more productive at $15 an hour, we can actually hire 4 people. Still 5 and 6 are not making enough sandwiches to make it. If product in the product market, let's say demand goes up for sandwiches and people are willing to pay more for their sandwiches, maybe now instead of $1.50 extra per sandwich, because prices went up, maybe now we have $5 extra per sandwich. In that case, it dramatically changes this, right? So we would go from $10, $50 an hour, 75 an hour, 50, $25, $10, and still 0 for the last guy. Okay. So if the demand for sandwiches goes up, the price for that they're selling it for goes up. Now we can afford to pay more workers. So at $7.50, we would hire 5 people. At $15, we would hire 4 people. But you see the idea here, right? Wages are somehow directly linked to that value created by the employee. Okay, so here's a practice question for you. I want you guys to work on this on your own, pause it, and then I'll go over the answers. So Carolyn owns a soda factory. She hires workers in a competitive labor market to bottle soda. Her company's weekly output changes based on the number of people she has hired, and you can see that in the table below. So part A, let's say each case sells for $10 more than the cost of materials, and wages are $1,000 per week. So what you're going to want to do is calculate that marginal product of labor. So how much extra each worker is adding, and then multiply it by the $10 to get the marginal revenue product. And then you want to compare that to the wages. So if we're paying $1,000, how many workers are going to be hired? Next, we're going to assume that we have a union that is setting weekly wages at $1,500. And if all of the workers belong to the union, now how many workers will be hired instead? So the marginal revenue product of labor stayed the same, but wages are going up. And then for part C, if the price per case rises, so now each one sells for $15 an hour, will Carolyn hire more workers under union conditions? Okay, so pause here for just a minute and work on these, and then we will go over the answers on the next slide. Okay, so let's go over the answers now that you've worked on this. I have added over here my marginal revenue product of labor for $10 and for $15. So I just took the marginal product of labor and I multiplied it by $10 for this first one, and then I multiplied it by 15 for the second one. So that we could compare it to the weekly wages and figure out what the best options are. So, okay, in this case, for part A, she's going to hire 3 workers. Okay, because worker number 4 is going to add $800 of value. Worker 5 is only going to add $400 of value. And if they cost her $1,000 each, she is going to lose money by hiring those people. And so she will stop at 3 workers and she'll pay them each $1,000. If wages go up to $1,500, this third guy is not going to get hired anymore because he is only generating $1,200 a week. So at $1,500 now, she's going to hire only 2 people. Okay, VMP. Oh, I need to change that. VMP was the other book I was using. Okay, so marginal revenue product of labor. MRPL. Okay, I'll change it in the slides. Okay, so it no longer covers the cost of that third worker. What happens when the case price rises? So now she's getting $15 extra per each. So now I created a new marginal revenue product of labor over here. Everything basically increased by $5 per case. And now at $15, or I mean at $1,500 wages, we would hire 3 people. And at $1,000 wages, we would hire 4 people. So she is going to hire more. She's going to hire more workers. Okay, under both conditions. So if the value that she's selling the product for goes up, she's going to have more money to pay workers. She's going to hire more workers because they're bringing in more money.